Welcome back to the Git Basics video series. Git can be confusing, and it's easy to find yourself in a situation you don't understand. In these next two videos, we'll focus on a few tools that Git provides to examine your repository. These tools are very useful to figure out what's going on in a given situation. Along the way, we'll build your understanding of what Git is doing and how Git works. We'll be looking at 5 commands: Git Status, Git Diff, Git Log, Git Show, Git Remote. This video will cover the first 2, Git Status and Git Diff. Then we'll cover the other 3 in the next video. Git Status helps you see the current situation of your working directory and staging area. The working directory is the folder where all your project files are. It's the folder where you ran git init. Of course, to use any git command, we must first be somewhere inside our working directory. I'm going to switch into the folder now. I'll use the cd command to change directory. Then I can list the files using the ls command to verify I'm in my project folder. These look like the right files. For this demo, I'll be showing an HTML and CSS website project. If you're not already familiar with HTML and CSS, you'll learn about them later in your bootcamp. But you do not need to know these languages in order to understand this demo. Git works the same for any programming language. In fact, it works the same for any kind of files at all. I'll also be using Visual Studio Code as my editor, but all the principles are the same, no matter what editor you're using. Now, before we go any further, let me emphasize one thing when working with Git. Always save your files before you run any Git command. Git only works with the files you have saved. It can't even see the unsaved changes in your editor. So first, I'll check that all my editor tabs are saved. One tip for this is that most editors mark unsaved tabs with either a circle or an asterisk. I did forget to save one, so I'll save that now. It is worth knowing the keyboard shortcut for saving a file. On Windows, hold down Ctrl and press S. On Mac, hold Command and press S. That works in almost every program. Now that my files are saved, I'll switch over to the command line and run Git Status to see what's here. In my configuration, items appear in different colors. This may not be the case in your configuration, but the same text appears. Git Status generally shows 3 sections, although if any section is empty, it will not be shown. The first section is Changes to be committed. This is the staging area. If I do a commit right now, these are the only changes that will be committed. Essentially, this shows all the changes that I've already added to the staging area using the git add command. Remember our analogy of packing a box? This is the box. Notice that there are 2 kinds of changes staged right now. The about file is a new file I created, and the index file is a file I had already committed in a previous snapshot, but now I've made some modifications. What can we learn about the current state of our repository from this? Let's start to diagram it out. On the left, we'll put what things looked like the last time we made a commit. This represents the most recent snapshot in the timeline. On the right, we'll put what things look like now. That is, anything that's changed since the last commit. Again, we see that the about file is new. So it did not exist in the last commit, but it does exist now. The index file did exist already, but now it has some modifications. Those are the only changes that I've put in the staging area. The next section is Changes not staged for commit. These are any modified or deleted files that I have not yet added to the staging area. If I commit right now, they will not be part of the commit. Interestingly, the change I made here was to delete the Grant Chirpus file. That means this file no longer exists in this folder, but Git knows about it from a previous commit. We can add to our diagram that Grant Chirpus existed in the previous commit, but does not exist now. The final section is Untracked Files. This section always consists of new files that have not been added or committed to the Git repository yet. We can see here that gc.png did not exist before, but it does now. Git tracks all three kinds of changes: creating, modifying, and deleting files. All three types of changes must be added to the staging area before they can be committed. Let's add both of the unstaged changes to the staging area now. Now I'll run Git Status again to see where we're at. Only one section shows this time: changes to be committed. Since we added both of the other changes, now all 4 of our changes are in the staging area ready to commit. Let's update the diagram to show this. But before we commit, it will be interesting to compare Git Status with what's actually in the folder right now. Let's run an ls to list the files. This simply lists the files that are actually in this folder right now, not specific to Git. Some of the same files are there, but there are some differences. First, notice that Git Status says that we deleted grantchirpus.jpg, and indeed that file is not in the list of files currently in the folder. But also notice that there are 3 other files in the folder that do not show up in Git Status. That's because Git Status only shows files that have been created, modified, or deleted since the last commit. The other files, gitcommands.html, logo.png, and style.css, have already been committed in a previous commit and have not been changed. Git Status only shows changes that have occurred since the last commit. So let's add those 3 files to the diagram. They are the same in the last commit as they are now. Okay, so Git Status tells us which files have changed. But what if we want to know what modifications were made to a file? We can use Git Diff. Diff is short for difference. This can be really helpful if you see a file changed and you don't remember changing it, or if you want to examine just what you did and did not change. To test it out, let's go in and modify gitcommands.html. I'll delete a line, add a line here, and change this line. And let's not forget to save my changes. Now let's go back to the terminal and run Git Status. Gitcommands.html shows up as modified. Let's see just what we changed. I'll run git diff gitcommands.html. The removed line is indicated by a minus sign. The added line is here with a plus. And the modified line is interesting. Git shows it as removing the old version of the line and adding the new version of it. Now let's look at index.html. That was modified too. I'll run git diff index.html. Well, that's disappointing. Did the file not actually change? What happened is that git diff compares the current file to the staged file. Right now, the index file is already staged, so there's no difference. What we want is the difference compared to the last commit. To get this, add the staged flag to the command, git diff --stagedindex.html. Now we can see that this about line has been added, and this img line has been modified. Git diff can actually be used to compare a lot of different things. For example, comparing files in 2 different commits. But we'll stop here for this video. If you want to try anything else, just search the web for Git Diff. To wrap up this video, let's do a couple review questions. I'll read the question, then a 5-second countdown will show on the screen before I reveal the answer. Please pause the video before the countdown ends to give yourself time to decide on the answer. Brain science shows that if you take the time to try to figure out the answer to each question, it will help you remember these things in the long term. Let's start with the first question. What command do you use in order to see which lines in a file have changed? Git diff is the answer. For example, to see what has changed in the file index.html, run git diff index.html. For the next question, here is the output of a git diff command. Can you tell what line was added, which line was removed, and which line was modified? Kilimanjaro was added. It's green with a plus sign. Holly was removed, red with a minus. McKinley was changed to Denali. The old line was removed and replaced with a new line. What command do you use to see a list of files that have changed? Just run Git Status. Here's an example of the output of Git Status. Which files were added, which were deleted, and which were modified. Panda and lion were added, snake was deleted, parakeet and turtle were modified. Here's the same Git Status output again. This time, identify which changes are staged and which are unstaged. Panda, snake, and parakeet are staged. The new file lion is not staged, and neither is the change to turtle. That's all for this video. We looked at the first two Git commands that help you see what's going on with your local Git repository. Git Status helps us see what changes are in our working directory and staging area since the last commit. Git Diff lets us see how a certain file has been modified. In the next video, we'll continue on and look at 3 more commands that help us explore the history of our repository.